Welcome to another episode of the Sparkles of Gold Astrology Manifesto podcast. My name is Nicolas Polimanakos, aka Sparkles of Gold. It's late Sunday night at a conference, my friends. I'm slurring my words. It's another episode of 3 questions, and tonight I am with
Becca Tarnas.
Becca, thanks for agreeing and trusting and coming on the podcast. As always, my audience knows, but the astrologer does not know the 3 questions I'm going to ask. So let's start with question number 1. Becca, what's your favorite astrological technique?
Favorite astrological technique? Well, probably working with personal transits, looking at especially outer planetary transits and seeing those larger life cycles, how they unfold. And I especially find interesting the dynamic between the outer planetary cycles that we all go through at the same age. So the Saturn squares, oppositions, return, etc., or the Uranus opposition and return. And then how that maps with the ones that we all have at totally different times, where someone might have Neptune transiting their sun as a child and someone else might have it far into adulthood.
Yes.
And how that kind of has a unique story that unfolds over that deeper musical score that we all share.
Right. Yeah. No. It's interesting you say that because it's the typical things, right? Every 7 years with Saturn, we can break Jupiter down in its cycles and all that. It's typical, and everybody has it. But yeah, in outer body sense, like I think about since 2008, someone was born in 2008, 2010. You know, Pluto's on their sun right off the bat. You know what I mean? And there's some people who might never have that with outer body planet transits. Okay. Before we leave this question. Is there anything lately technique-wise that's like you're like, oh, I want to know about that? Like, I don't know what's up with that technique. Yeah.
Zodiacal releasing.
Yes, totally, yeah.
The great timing technique that I think many of us, when we first encounter, maybe feel completely intimidated by and maybe also intensely curious about and thinking, I want to know how to do that.
Yes, yeah. So. I'm in the same boat, by the way.
Yeah.
I know a little bit, and I let it go, and I'm back into it. I'm trying to okay, which teacher, what resource am I going to go to? I'm pulling up my Zodiacal Releasing and Astral Gold and trying to make my own deciphering thing, at least in connection with my life, all that stuff. But I feel you on that one.
Yeah.
Thanks for answering the first question.
Yes.
All right, so here's the second one. What's the earliest memory you have connected to astrology?
Well, as a second-generation astrologer, that goes so far back that I don't know exactly how to identify. I have to actually think about that for a second. What's coming up, but this can't be the earliest memory, but when I was 6 years old, I asked my dad for a reading. And it was recorded on a tape cassette, which I really want to find. And I just remember him explaining the meanings of the planets through mythology, because I loved mythology. And so I knew who Aphrodite was. I knew who Ares was. I knew who Zeus was and so forth. And so I could relate to it in that way. And yet also it was quite a mystery at the same time. So that isn't the earliest memory, but that was the first, I think, expression of curiosity on my part. I think there's memories that go much deeper that I later could make sense of when I would hear my parents speak about different transits people were going through or a different aspect someone would have, and I could just tell the meaning from the tone in their voice.
Oh,
so,
interesting. Mm-hmm.
They'd be like, oh, he's got Saturn transiting his Pluto right now. And you could just hear it in their voice. They're like, oh, she's going through a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I'm like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think hearing those emotional tonal qualities actually taught me a lot more astrology than I realized up until I actually started learning it. And then it was implicit it was kind of like implicit knowledge because I'd had that early exposure.
Yeah, the organic knowledge. You know, I asked these questions, answers of just the varied memories that come up. Earlier today, I talked to somebody who came up in the household. It was just there. Their parents were practicing too. I always wondered that. I didn't come up to it that way, you know. It's so interesting to hear when I ask this. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. You know, one thing too, I hope you find the tape, right? Off the bat, and there's no judgment here. I'm wondering, it's interesting what was possibly happening to you when you were 6 years old, even by outer body, if there is, to kind of connect the first question, the first answer you had. But we don't have to do that now, but it's just a thought that's popped up in my head, you know.
Yeah. Oh, now I'm trying to think what I would have had. It was a little... It would have been before, probably, maybe just close to leading into my first Saturn square.
Yes, yeah.
And so you know what? Actually, because my Saturn is at 21 degrees Sagittarius and my Sun is at 4 degrees Sagittarius, I very likely had Saturn squaring my Sun. And so that kind of early self-definition.
Right.
And wanting to better understand who I am in this kind of container context.
Yeah, it's kind of that first, because of a challenge like that too, but almost in the sense of like a foundational structure, a pillar wanting to be built, and the first steps towards that, you know. All right. Thanks for answering the second question.
Yep.
All right, cool. And
each of these questions has other questions attached.
I know. Everybody says to me, this is the sixth question, Nicholas. Yeah, it totally is, and I can't help it. So... my listeners know Mercury and Gemini, exactly Bartel Uranus, so this is what happens with me. Third question is, what are you reading these days, book-wise? And I'm going to say it in this way. I have to say this to all the astrologers. I'm going to say, what are you reading that's not astrology? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm reading at least 2 books simultaneously. And so one is part of the research that I'm doing for the biography I'm currently working on the life of Stanislav Grof, psychiatrist who's done about 7 decades of research into LSD psychotherapy.
Holotropic breathing.
Yep. Getting
in the States. Yeah, I know about Stan.
So I'm currently making my way through his book, Beyond the Brain, which came out in 1985. And it really is a synthesis of a lot of both his research, but also the philosophical and psychological and scientific ideas that came out of that research that essentially suggest that consciousness is beyond the brain. So that's one of the books I'm reading. The other one, I'm rereading Jane Austen's Emma right now in preparation for a course I'm teaching this fall called Archetypes, Art, and Culture, that's looking at art, music, poetry, literature, film, and so forth through an astrological lens. And Jane Austen, and particularly her novel Emma, is a great example of Moon Saturn.
Oh, okay, so, nice. A lot of the initial answer I get, you're like, everything's connected to astrology, but I have to change the question up to like, okay, what are you reading, you know, and everything always leads back there, right? As astrologers, we all know that, but I'm just understanding. Usually this is when I end, but I'm going to throw something else on the bookend. And I've asked this with other people. You go back to when you're a kid or whatever age, what was a book back then that you read, whatever book that it is, that when it entered your world, when you took the book in, it changed you. It made its imprint. It forever not just hit your brain, but hit your hearts.
Well, for that, I have to say that when I was 9 years old, my class teacher read us J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. And that was completely life-changing to the point that it's defined my career in some ways. And I had this experience in hearing her read that story where it felt deeply familiar. I felt like I already knew the names and was familiar with these places in Middle-earth, like I'd been there before. And it absolutely captured my imagination. And I came home and I told my mom this experience of hearing this story, and she's like, well, wait till you read The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And so when I finally read that, it was as though I was living in two worlds, the world of a teenager in San Francisco with all the normal problems and trials and struggles of being a teenager, and then this totally enchanted, numinous, imaginal realm of Middle Earth that Tolkien's Lord of the Rings had opened the doorway to for me. So,
yes.
Yes.
Thank you for answering the bonus question.
Gladly.
Yeah, and thanks for being on the podcast. Where can people find out more about you?
I have a website. It's beccatarnas.com, and I have posted there. Typically, I'll announce any events that are coming up, but I also have a lot of writings from over the years and videos and podcasts and so forth. So that's kind of the central hub where to find things out about me. And I'm on the social media platforms too.
Yes, and for those who don't know, some of the lectures you have, astrology-wise, are connected to and use the Lord of the Rings, the Tolkien, just so for people who don't know.
Yes.
Now we got it. I just want to point that out. Becca, thanks for coming on the podcast and answering the 3 questions.
Thank you for inviting me and asking such interesting questions.